Thanks, Alex, for speaking to us. So, Alex, before we get into the nitty gritties of fintech and wealth investment, would be interesting to understand that when you look from an outside, and because you have a lot of investment background, you have been into investing yourself, you have been working for wealth investment companies in Europe and in Southeast Asia now. How do you define this industry from wealth investment point of view, investment tech point of view? How do you define this industry that you operate in?
That's a good question. I do think it's a manifestation of crossbreeding, right? These two industries together. I know you said, finance, certain aspects of it have been around 200 years, but, frankly, you could add a zero onto that as well. I mean, people have been borrowing money from people
Right.
for thousands of years, right? Since the pyramids were made even. So it's actually, it's something that's been baked in societies for a long, long time, right? And
Mm.
if we talk about tech as well, right? Let's just discount all tech before 2000 because it was there, to be clear, but between our realm of mobile apps and things like that is extremely new as
Mm.
well, right? So I do see it as a gelling of both, especially, within financial services. At the end of the day, the underlying like exchange of money, the purpose of why people need money, why people need to invest, why people need advice and need planning probably hasn't changed. Maybe some of the needs and ways of access have changed. And those are the things I think which have been accelerated, especially in terms of accessibility by technology, right? But
Mm.
somebody needs money for purpose X or purpose Y or purpose Z. Those are things that have transcended for hundreds of years, right? And which have probably been, which I know have been human driven, right? So I think one of the
Mm.
biggest changes is the fact that, now we're trying to do this at scale, and that's
Mm.
where tech is coming in. It's to enable the scaling of these services to hundreds of thousands to millions of people, and obviously that can't be easily served at scale by individuals. So
Mm.
I think that's one of the biggest, so when I view fintech, it's about how do we scale in terms of wealth management, the accessibility of these services, and that's where technology comes into play. It's about that outreach, it's about that engagement, it's about that in the future we can talk about it later, personalization
Mm.
as well, and that's where tech comes in different ways as well, but it generally doesn't change the underlying nature of the purpose of like why somebody needs advice on their money or needs access to money.
Mm.
Does that make
Got.
sense?
No, that does. That does. So fair enough. This is useful, and we can build on top of that. So, for example, if let's say I am wanting to break into Stashaway, or I'm trying to be a product manager there, what do I know about Alex, who's the CPO at Stashaway, in terms of his primary focus areas? What are his KPIs? How do I relate to those things so that I know I can help you going forward?
Well, like I think, you know, first, having a clear understanding of the ecosystem is something I think is critical.
Mm.
Um, you know, finance in general is actually a very large array. It's a very broad ecosystem, but zooming in on just wealth management, understanding some of the different key components of that, I think is important, right? So for say for something like Stashaway, who are like who are the people that we engage with?
Mm.
What are the types of companies in the ecosystem? Who's relevant to us in order to build and expand and service our investors and fuel our business are important, right? So having that, I think that knowledge around the financial industry is something that is crucial, right, for
Mm.
anybody. I think just generally wanting to work in it as well. So it's whether it's about understanding some of the key players in that industry, right? Whether things like exchanges and market makers and investment management shops, fund managers, and
Mm.
companies that build financial products, these securities which we buy and sell, and understanding the role of the regulator and different licensing agreements. And who does what and how they differ sometimes per regions is crucial, right? And then just understanding the nature of the business, right? Us, Stashaway, for example, being a fund manager, it's basically our job to allocate your money in ways that
Mm,
are in line with your own objectives, and we charge a fee for it, very simply, right? So some of our KPIs obviously are about um, accumulating more money. We call it assets, right? So when I say assets, I generally just mean money, assets under management, because we charge a fee for those
mm,
services. Whereas other uh, apps, which maybe people use to trade securities, buy and sell something very quickly, aka potentially known as brokers, they might be charging. They make money differently on like a per transaction basis, or maybe by selling those orders to downstream brokers to help facilitate that. Us being a fund manager, we actually can't make money for regulated purposes and reasons,
mm,
and that as well. So that's why we charge fees for these services. For our advisory services. So I think just understanding kind of the differences between the roles of key players in your vertical, in the ecosystem, is important to just getting an understanding of
mm,
how it operates and the main drivers behind that. And then, of course, there's things that I think similar to other realms, right? Which more people coming from traditional technology companies, like maybe selling software, for example, would relate to, right? Costs of acquisition,
mm,
retention. They call them users. I don't like, I call users investors in our case, right? But our investors, cost to serve, operating costs, et cetera. Those are all actually quite similar because building and scaling technology, comes with
mm,
many of those aspects in order to grow and build a business at the end of the day. But other factors I think people discount when entering a business like Stashaway, being a fund manager, are things like the impacts of market performance, right,
mm,
on the industry. Our underlying business, tracks against certain benchmarks, and as those benchmarks go up and down, that influences everything across the stack from investors' behaviors and deposit mandates and regulations come up as well, right? And news and the themes of the month. So, there are many things I'd say in this realm that can sometimes be out of our direct
mm.
control,
Sure.
if that makes sense, but are major factors and are one of the core KPIs that we would use to evaluate the success of a business, being its market performance
Mm,
as well,
mm,
right?
mm.
From a portfolio management perspective. So,
No, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, one thing I was realizing when you talked about being a fund manager yourself and working with brokerage houses, I think some of our viewers might be interested to understand. Like, for example, if I go to Stashaway's platform and I buy a stock of, let's say, Apple, what would that journey look like? So, for example, the journey behind the curtains. Like, would when I place an order with you, how do you place an order behind, and how does the workflow work?
yeah, I mean, great question. And I won't go into like level three
Of
details
course.
here, but essentially, we have uh, a mobile app, which is our main way that
Mm,
our investors do things like deposit money, select the portfolios or the particular securities they would like to invest and purchase in. And then from the tech side, these orders get netted out and sent to our internal services, which then get passed to something like a broker, right?
mm,
Whether it's Saxo or a particular bank, for other services, right? Where they connect into the relevant exchanges to help with the trade execution aspect of it, with sometimes with a currency management aspects of it, because we operate in numerous countries. For example, if you wanted to buy a share of Apple or a BlackRock ETF and it's listed on the Nasdaq or it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange or the S&P, those are US denominated, but you're
mm,
putting money in Singapore dollar. It needs to get converted, it needs to get routed to an exchange, it needs to get purchased within market hours, and then it needs to go back to a particular custodian and trust account where we use local custodians to help
mm,
separate customer funds and business funds, and then to also create a ledger in order to maintain records of accounts on behalf of our, tens of thousands of customers
mm,
up the stack, right? And then obviously in between all these surfaces, there's operational teams at each one that have their own micro processes to help facilitate the hours, how trades happen, how they're audited, how they're routed to always ensure best pricing as well, and visibility, and probably a million other things as well, to even the security selection. Actually, beginning even before all of that starts, there's a huge process as well, because we advise, people can do things on our platform such as purchase securities, but our real bread and butter is actually taking, setting up long-term investment plans for our
Mm,
investors. So we have a team of people, of humans that of course employ technology and to curate individual portfolios that are in line with people's time frames and risk appetites, and they will select the securities that go into your portfolio
mm,
based off of information we find out about you to meet your needs and risk appetites. And then those go through, I'd say, all the operational flows to facilitate the trade, and then everything after that, from the reporting to the rebalancing to the reoptimization
mm,
of portfolios based off of market events as well. And then, of course, there's all the third party types of integrations we do, whether it's to um, facilitate the onboarding of an investor, right, to make sure people aren't laundering money through our services, to get market data integration, to get market pricing into our
mm.
software as well. So there's all these tertiary elements as well to support, the underlying business. So there's a lot. There's definitely, it's an assembly of many different uh, services across the stack. And for this whole thing I just described, one country, all those
Sure.
interparts, it could be different in another country as
Right.
well, right? So as we operate across multiple countries, there's more banks we got to engage with, different brokers, different custodians, different regulators that
Mm.
sometimes change the way the flow works. I hope
Right.
that makes sense. It's
No, that makes a lot of
yeah,
sense. Yeah, because I think what happens, and we talked about this from a different context, that when you talk about financial industry and you come from a perspective of seeing an e-commerce app, you just think that app as an experience. You don't realize that so
yeah.
many people you need to integrate and
There's
APIs.
planes, there's logistics,
Correct.
there's warehouses,
C-
there's people on
correct.
the floor. Yeah, absolutely.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So some of these things can be very, very complicated as well. Perfect. This makes sense. Uh, maybe we can switch gears and come back to this in a minute.
Yeah.
One of the things that Alex, you and I have spoken a lot, and I know that you're extremely passionate about, is product discovery. You have written about this a lot on your blog as well, and you have done a lot of work in, at least with us at funding societies, and I'm sure you would be doing that Stashaway as well.
Yeah.
Uh, would be interesting to understand what your product discovery process is. And maybe you can start with an insight in terms of what this process has helped you figure and unravel about your customers, and then we can also dig deeper into how your process looks like, and then we can take it from there.
We'll break it into three parts right here before I go into the
Hmm.
4 steps of success, right? To do product discovery.
Hmm.
I think, first and foremost, answering what is discovery, aka I'll just call it research in this case, allows to do it, allows us to understand, I mean, the classic explanation, understand the needs and
Hmm.
behaviors of our clients or potential clients. But furthermore, it's helped us carve up different segments
Hmm.
of clients as well that either we target for various reasons. And as these things change, as you're in business, year one, year two, year three, year four, things change, needs change from your investors as well, and it allows us to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of
Hmm.
what our investors are doing. So I'd say, our research and our analysis is something that, while it's not perfect, I definitely am proud of the fact that we do it consistently. We don't
Nice.
do it just for the next big thing, right? Of course, we do a lot of research for the next big thing, but
Hmm.
every month, we've put a lot of effort into the pipelines to gather feedback, to categorize feedback, to analyze feedback on a monthly basis at volume, at scale, so that we can use it to, iterate the product uh, and learn about our investor behavior and what's going on, which might or might not lead to opportunities for our
Hmm.
product development teams to seize on down the line. And I think one big misconception out there is that it's this big, scary thing. I mean, research could literally be just like looking at the web app reviews coming in every
Correct.
month and categorizing them. It could be looking at NPS results. It could be getting PMs and designers and people from the business on the phone
Mm.
with clients once a week just for a general talk or something specific as well, because all these things accumulate and add up, and I call this like the formation of raw data points,
Mm.
which then you curate and potentially use for something later on. But I'd say, everybody likes frameworks, right? So I
Yep.
definitely would say um, we do have this framework, I suppose. If you imagine a two by two axis at the moment, right? And you got four quadrants starting from the my bottom left, yeah. You got this first stage, which is about observations. You got a second stage, which is the upper left quadrant, then which is about insights. The third stage is about principles, and the fourth stage is then about solutions. And when you look at these different stages, starting at the on the vertical axis at the top, you can label as abstract, and the bottom as concrete, and then on the left hand side analysis, and then the right hand side synthesis. So
Mm.
starting off on observations, this is the things I'm talking about concretely are analyzing feedback, conducting user interviews, um, and then because these are actual real observations that you're making, raw data forms, and then you're going into the analysis mode of it,
Mm.
right? That's why they're in this analysis spectrum. Uh, and this is, when you're doing, say for example, we have an idea for a new product that we want to launch, and we want to understand the best way to communicate it, the best way to serve it via the mobile app, what to call it, how to market it, how to communicate it, some of the parameters around it. In the insights and the principle stage, that's where it's all about using these observations, looking for patterns,
Mm.
looking for similarities, looking for root causes, going through, obviously, there's tactical steps and exercises to help do that. But in general, that's, the whole point of these
Right.
insights phases and then building principles. For example, for us, one thing that's always been big, and actually not just here, but my, previous, whenever I've built products in wealth management, I've always continuously learned, like as a principal, it's all about building trust. How do you build trust? You maybe be transparent. So we'll build design principles saying at every step when you're onboarding somebody or pitching a product, be as transparent as possible
Mm.
at that step in the mobile app. I'm talking about things like transparency on pricing, who's managing the money, what products are being purchased, why they're being purchased, et cetera, right? I mean, that's just one example of a principle. And then you go into solutions, and that's actually when you put more pen to paper, come up with prototypes, coming up with different ways to name a feature or a product, testing it out, going through those prototype evaluation steps, testing steps as well. And sometimes it's run as like a 2 to 4 week process, but then sometimes if you're just making iterations, you can just do some of the steps involved over a couple of days, like analyzing feedback on a recently released product over a 1 week cycle, and evaluating if you need to take additional steps to
Mm.
refine something as well. So I think it's, people like structure, especially on the younger side, the junior side. If I'm talking to junior PMs here as well, to help turn things that are naturally ambiguous, like, oh my God, how do I discover the problem and then solve it, into kind of four concrete steps you can use
Mm.
with the sub exercises to realize actually, there's no rocket science. It takes practice and experience, but there are certain motions you can go through in order to reach that end result, which is what the teams are going to build and why, and hopefully a way that makes sense and is backed by logic and data, and isn't just like something somebody built in an ivory tower, then spent $1 million
Mm.
building, then launching it, and then it not sticking, right? Which is very common. Some
Right.
people do it right, but we're not all Steve Jobs, yeah. So
Yep.
I can't say it would do it, so I follow steps to help try and get
Got
to
it.
that path.
Got it.
Yeah,
This is super, super useful. I've got multiple directions from this. Let's
yeah,
take it from there.
yeah.
So, having, for example, you talked about trust, and within financial services, that's probably the most important factor when you talk about offering financial services. I'll give you an example. So, back in India, when I was heading product for lending card, we wanted to build a referral program.
Mm,
And what happened was that everybody was excited that this is a growth loop that we can go for.
mm,
And then we started talking to customers, our merchants, and we said that we were prototyping and figuring out will this work for them or not. And what we realized was that merchants are not proud of saying that they took a loan from fintech,
Mm,
because what that means is that a bank didn't give them a loan. And
mm,
then it suddenly struck us that the pecking order of banks, NBFCs in India, and then the fintech comes in. And unless you make a customer proud about getting a loan, and it's not about the process, it's about the institution per se.
right, right.
And that changed a lot of things about when we thought about trust. And it also, we didn't eventually launch a feature, but that had a lot of bearing in my mind when I thought about why trust matters, how do you even understand what trust is, and how do you solve for trust. And some of what you talked about, the 2 by 2 framework for doing research, it's so powerful and so easy, so you can break things into various aspects. Would be interesting to know from your experience at Stashaway or Netmake, and feel free to share what you can. Have you uncovered any such insights which seem slightly less intuitive to people like ourselves about what it takes to build trust for your investors when they're applying to your at Stashaway, or when you were building social investment platform at Netmake?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, oof, I could probably talk for an hour,
I know.
straight on building trust. I just want to say, trust now I've had the opportunity and the privilege of, building a similar product in different countries. So I actually first want to go down to the root level of, say I'm building this wealth management product in Singapore
Hmm.
or the UK, right? I mean, just, taking with a pinch of salt, okay, I'm launching a service which is licensed by a reputable regulator, MAS or the FCA, or in the States, the SEC. And it goes through various licensing, and you hire various professionals with qualifications, and you launch it, and you have big backing. I mean, there's probably inherent trust already baked into your service,
Hmm.
because people will realize, yeah, well, that's why we have a regulator, to make sure that scams don't hit the market and take my money. Especially because I deal with products which, sometimes we have the privilege of managing entire people's entire life savings, right? And
Hmm.
they're not buying a piece of shampoo here. I'm literally helping to build product to manage people's nest eggs, their children's investment funds,
Yeah.
their deposits for a wedding or buying a car or going to a trip, like the whole spectrum, right? So I think a lot of places also, depending on the culture, have the advantage of having these institutions in place where they go, okay, this company, it passed those tests. At least I know that they're not going to run off and take my money, right?
Sure.
There's
Yeah.
there's things in place, but in other countries, that frankly might not exist. In
Hmm.
some countries, people don't trust the banks because those banks have disappeared, or they
Hmm.
don't trust the currency because, you know, I, um, I heard a funny quote actually from Vitalik, the Ethereum guy, when he was down in South America. He said, "Yeah, people don't trust the local currency because it only goes down. At least something like Ethereum, it goes up and down, right? So, due to impacts of inflation and such. So, I when building trust in a country like the UK or
Hmm.
Singapore, and what's important, it's a completely different element. It's actually it's big. You want people, you gotta highlight different aspects of it.
Hmm.
Maybe the people who are behind the team, rather than, in other countries are going, what is this? Is this a scam? Is this a business that's gonna just
Hmm.
close shop and run off with my money after they take it in a year and a half, right?
Right.
And the steps to do that, I mean, you highlight different things during onboarding, during communications, during marketing, on your website, at events. A lot of
Hmm.
the time when you're beginning in new countries, you gotta, even though we're a digital business, you gotta host in-person events. They want to see, is this a company with an office with people? Do they have, I mean,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
actually goes to that level, and it's extremely important. It's something I've learned all the way operating in
Right.
new countries as well, right? So it it can be so different. I mean, there's things that are going to be the same, like who's managing my money, and
Hmm.
what securities are you buying, but then things like, where are you storing the money?
Hmm.
How is it being used? If the company goes out of business, do I lose my money? Like, these are questions that sometimes you got to focus on,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
specifically in other countries as well. And those are extremely valid points,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, yeah, you got to personalize, you got to localize rather,
Right.
for building trust along the way. But
Yeah.
yeah, then things like being transparent with pricing and what you say you're going to do. I feel those are quite cross-regional, just
Sure.
as human beings, but the level of expectation can sometimes be different depending on the market and how
Right.
saturated it is, and uh, as well.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Yeah. Actually, I'll probably share an example which to
Mm,
me was a beautiful example of trust or lack thereof.
mm,
And let's see if you have some stories around that. So,
yeah.
back in 2013, I was in a payments company and we were trying to launch a one-click payment. So, like Amazon had a one-click payment. We wanted to build a product like that.
Mm,
And in that experience, there was an OTP process. So, a bank, when the payment happens, you will go to a bank page. You have to enter an OTP and then you make the payment.
right.
We, because wanted to make the payment seamless, we wanted to get rid of that page itself, and we felt that if we can somehow skip that journey, that would be extremely valuable for the customer. We started talking to and we hated that page because it looked ugly and it's poor UX and everything, right? And when we started doing our customer interviews, people said that I like this page because it's ugly, therefore I associate that it comes from a bank and therefore I can trust it. And that was such an and when you think about trust, you think that you will skip that space and you'll talk about seamlessness, but people like that trust from coming from a bank. And even not even, especially if it's an ugly experience, because that's what they think of the bank. And that to me was something that kind of made me think that I have to think more about relationship with money. I have to think about relationship with their existing institutions and so on and so forth. Are there any such instances that comes to your mind when you were building for trust at Nutmeg or funding societies or your previous organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been cases back in Nutmeg where in the early days, we made mistakes. For example, we maybe accidentally debited on mass scale our investors' funds, accounts twice instead
Hmm.
of once, right? This is a massive, actually a massive problem.
Sure.
And obviously we, went back with all the reimbursements and such. But, a lot of people where they said, oh, okay, mistake, it happens. And then some other people obviously were on the other end of the spectrum because maybe they didn't have the funds in their account, right?
Hmm.
And just the level of how you rectify it and communicate to people, it's, when you're dealing with over 60, 70, 80, 100,000 people, it's sometimes tough to personalize a message
Correct.
for everybody. You know what I mean? It gets really hard. And what we ended up doing, and maybe it was, the right or the wrong thing is like one, we self-reported our mistake to the regulators, which at the time it was, I don't know why we did that because frankly, we did it in with good intention. And
Hmm.
then they said, "Oh, thank you for the reporting that. Here's a big fat fine." Oh, okay, well, okay. Like, regardless of doing things like that,
Right.
um, we'd say, hey, if there's an issue, we actually would staff up and put even more people on customer support
Right.
lines so they could reach out with questions and have somebody to talk to about, and not just this topic or anything else as well, in detail, and provide a lot more information about these incidents as well. Again, that's like it's being accessible to people who have questions, right?
Hmm.
Regardless of the question, and then providing that information for self-serve purposes for the people that just want to self-serve it. And
Right.
I think it depends on uh, who we're engaging with, but some people like are very self-serve, and as long as it's emailed to them or accessible on a web page, no problem. But some people want to get on the phone and really
Hmm.
dig in and talk to a human and
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
kind of get you know that's their form of insurance, right?
Yeah.
As well. So yeah, I think probably other examples, whether it's about data leaks that sometimes
Hmm.
happen, and you
Sure.
report that as well. And then I think I, I think one thing you were talking about earlier that I thought was interesting was, when you're trying to create growth loops,
Hmm.
and you said that there was actually maybe this perspective of people, I don't know, being ashamed of taking money from a
Yeah.
non-bank because it's not a tier one. I guess, maybe back in the day that would be seen here because our service, we do what private banks did and charged an arm and a leg for years ago, but now we're doing the same level of service for a fraction of the price for everyday
Hmm.
investors as well. And I felt like maybe we were lucky in the fact. that it actually became a, hey, look at the same level of service I'm getting for a fraction of the price, a bit of a
Hmm.
sense of pride, but it also depends on the nature of the product they're in. Because of course, for us, like organic growth referrals is the best flywheel you can have for
Hmm.
COA purposes or cost of acquisition purposes. And we realized, okay, in order to get people to talk about the product and refer their friends and colleagues and family members, sometimes you would need to. We realized that if they're investing in a product which it not only benefits them but maybe benefits society. So for example, this the whole social impact, ESG,
Hmm.
environmental investing thing that's kicked off over the past decade. Well, when I've launched products like that in the past, I realized, hey, as an aggregate, people are very happy to share that they're investing in these good for the world products, right? Because it's good for the world and it's good for their balance sheet as
Hmm.
well, right? Rather than just being good for their balance sheet
Interesting.
as well. So like we would take these type of insights
Nice.
and use that as levers to try and drive organic growth.
Yeah, makes sense. I think, and I've generally thought, and we don't need to discuss, but I've always felt that we need a product manager for trust in all these fintech organizations,
Mm.
just to understand what trust means and build on top of that.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah,
It's a very ambiguous space. You know what I mean? Which are the
yeah,
hardest
yeah, yeah.
ones to
Correct.
show impact on. I'm sure we both. Like, how do you
Yeah,
show impact that people trust us, right? It's like, is it
right.
an NPS score? Is it good reviews? Is it
Yeah,
like
yeah.
because people, they don't give you reviews when they're just
Happy.
satisfied. They
Yeah,
they only go when they're extremely happy or extremely pissed off, right? There's
right,
the in between. It's tougher, but
right.
yeah,
Fair enough.
yeah, it
Fun.
resonates with me.
Good. Again, feel free to answer this. Like, if you have stories, feel free to answer. Otherwise, not.
Yep.
When you look at trust from a user who's in Singapore or let's say UAE or UK versus what trust means for somebody in Indonesia, sorry, Thailand,
Yeah.
do you see any differences between what trust means for these different kind of personas coming from developed countries versus emerging markets, or maybe by age profile, or maybe by marital status and so on and so forth? Could trust mean different things for different people?
Yeah, I mean, look, in Singapore, I mean, it's a country that, I think it benefits from I'd say, a high level of financial literacy.
Okay.
Obviously, it's a country which is, built off of financial services in the region. There's lots of competition. A lot of those things I mentioned previously that are taken for granted. If you're a regulated company, so trust comes more down to actually like, are they being super transparent with the pricing?
Hmm.
Right? Like,
Sure.
and is
Sure.
this the cheapest option for the level of service? Right?
Yeah.
Like every basis point counts, right? On this island of ours as well because of the competition, and I absolutely understand that. Um, in Thailand, there's many more examples where these have been scams,
Hmm.
right? So people want to go, who are these people? Are they a real business? I mean, let
Hmm.
alone are they regulated or not? Because there's been historical issues with
Oh.
with the regulatory bodies as well. Like it's
Hmm.
about how do I trust the people building this business? And you really have to emphasize,
Hmm.
that over. They don't care about the difference between 10 or 20 basis points on the level of service, right? That's completely secondary to making sure
Right.
we're not going to run off with their money,
Right.
right?
Actually,
So
yeah.
yeah,
No, actually, when I think what you said, when I'm playing this in my mind, trust in Singapore is transparency. That are you transparent enough to generate trust? Trust in Thailand or emerging markets could be like integrity, just like are you even integral or not? Forget
Mm.
transparency. So it could mean different things, and that's so powerful. Yeah.
Yeah,
Nah.
it's challenging.
So on the product discovery, I think again you and I both are big fan of the mom's test,
Yeah,
but are there?
absolutely. Ryan Fitzpatrick, go download the PDF if you're not going to buy the book, everybody.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and yeah, I think it's the your religious standings aside, it's the Bible of user research and product discovery. But are there other books, other people whom you recommend that people can read up to know about product discovery or customer discovery?
so in addition to the mom test, right, how to talk to customers by Rob Fitzpatrick.
Hmm.
I mean, look, any of these books by some of the PM greats or whatever, the Marty Kagans and the
Hmm.
Teresa Torres's How to Escape the Build Traps and such. These are all great building blocks. No doubt about it, right? From the big publishers, and I think every person should read. read aspects of it. I would also say though that these days, we have more niche publications. There's, you can get information online.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's behind paywalls, but I think, companies like Reforge
Yep.
been some of the institutions that produce great content on things like research techniques and experimentation. I love the suite on their series on how to conduct experiments and different use
Hmm.
cases. I
Yep.
think are fantastic. To me, that is experimentation is part of the discovery
Right.
process as well,
Sure.
right? So but then honestly, these days as well, you can Google or I guess Chat GPT something a question of how do I learn about this and get pointed to a Medium article that somebody has published in the last 24 hours that has
Sure.
something new. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why I really think it's a combination of some of
Cool.
the pillars and new stuff as well. For of course,
Right.
I have a list of like 20 books. I give new people onboarding, hey, read this, but
Yeah.
I'm sure they could get the same material from other
As well as
sources
sure.
online by Googling it.
No, this is helpful. I think, yeah, and I know that you have created that list at a previous organization
Hmm.
and we still use that list very
Oh, great.
extensively to onboard new
Oh,
product managers.
great.
So yeah,
Yeah.
one thing that again on the premise of what we're trying to build at FinTech Town Square is
Yeah.
cross-functional leaders, right? People
Yeah.
who understand both business and technology and can bring technology to solve these problems.
Yeah.
You yourself has been a prolific investor. You've been investing for many years now, and now you're building for a platform like that. But when you look at young folks and who may not be as prolific investors like yourself, how do you one like do you think it's important for or how important it is for them to know the domain that they're operating in, be it lending, payments,
Yeah.
insurance, investments, and how do you think these people or young folks can build that expertise in terms of learning these cross-functional domains?
Obviously, first and foremost, if you have the opportunity and the privilege just to get a job in one of these domains, whether it's
Sure.
directly in it or in the peripheral, day to day. I mean, in terms of wealth management, I think there's now amazing online sources. I say, hey, every PM, if I get a question from somebody, I'd say that's about like one of our financial products. I'd say, have you Googled it? Have you Investopedia it? Right?
Hmm.
Using these online sources that there's literally essays written about how each different vertical and wealth management works and who all the players are, and you can double click into each player and understand the more the businesses behind it as well. So I mean, it's great that we live in a day and an age where you can get access to this information not
Right.
just from traditional academia as well to learn about it. I think reaching out to people in the space,
Sure.
right now I'm at a stage where I combine sources of learning. Of course, I have the privilege of being able to speak to regulators to understand at that level
Wow.
what's coming around the corner, and that which not everybody could do or should want to do. I think, secondly, of course, you know, your widely available news sources to see what getting published every day. But then third, I reach out to people at other companies, PMs in particular, and like 50 to 60% of the time, they're happy to have a chat
Hmm.
about their own business, what's changing, what's going on. And for me personally, I that's how I synthesize information by speaking with somebody in a very casual conversations, face to face, or on a call like this, and that's what's most effective to me. Right?
Hmm.
Some people maybe they love reading walls of text for getting understanding, and that's great. Right? To each their own. But I'd say reaching out to people to create your
Yeah.
own mind maps in particular of how ecosystems are built, and then researching about it
Sure.
is the way to go, especially for first time people looking for jobs in new
Right.
industries as well.
Got it. And talking about mind maps, again, one tool that we
Yeah,
both love to
yeah,
and a lot.
absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah.
what are the top topics or areas that you particularly are interested in when you are looking at investment tech? Is it about different asset classes? Is it about different markets? Is it about different regulations? What topics are you personally very interested in when you try to get up to speed?
So look, clearly I'm interested in all of those because it's part of my job
Sure.
to do so. But I one thing, and I'd say one thing I haven't cracked yet, and I don't maybe in my lifetime won't crack it, but for the past 10 years I've been observing this is that at the end of the day, the level of financial literacy and
Mm,
understanding of different investment philosophies, even in very
nice,
mature markets, is not there.
nice.
And that to me uh, is unacceptable. Like I've been one of the big proponents of, hey, I think around maybe third grade, or I don't know, when your kids are 10 or whatever age that is, they should be learning about like how money works. You
Mm,
never learn that in school about budgeting and how to invest in things for different purposes and the impact that compound interest can have and
right.
saving this amount from this age for 50 years, the difference that might be if you start 30 years later um, uh, as well. And the reason I say that is because, even from my time at Nutmeg, I could see from our product analytics, I could see the things like, okay, based off the information we've gathered about this person and little questions we've asked them, are they in the right products
Mm,
as well? And there's sometimes a huge mismapping. I'd say maybe
yep.
only 50% of them are, right? A classic example um, is somebody saying, "Oh, I'm saving up for a wedding in a year, and I need I don't know X thousand dollars to do so," and they're in a product though which is then inherently super
Mm,
risky and
sure.
volatile and is actually meant for 5 to 10 year
Mm.
horizon, right? And to me, that's like it's frustrating
Mm,
because whilst on the one hand, from a business perspective, okay, I'm getting paid for either one, but to me, that's not good investment behavior, right? I don't
mm,
want our investors in the wrong products for the
right.
wrong reasons as well. And I think that comes due to just lack of knowledge. And that's why
Yep.
we push out so much content on this stuff to understand on a weekly basis, right?
Nice.
The different needs, but it's still the not at the level where it should be, right? In this day
Yeah.
and age when there's so much information out there, that's one Google search and you can get access to it to me. So yeah, about like investment behavior and just knowledge of, how to make money work for you and different methodologies is something that across all markets
Mm,
globally I've observed isn't where it should be, right?
right. Yep.
As well.
So you talked about level of, like, basically same points in very different and very articulate words, is level of financial literacy, investment
Yeah.
behavior is a topic that you research a lot.
Yeah.
What else is something that's always exciting and keeping you awake in terms of learning new topics within investment tech?
Naturally, there, every year there's probably a new way to invest in new asset
Mm,
classes as
right.
well, right? I mean, not just the bread and butter stuff, what we do, but now, I think again, for the right people with the right circumstances, um, for example, getting access to private investment
Yes.
opportunities, which you used to have to be a private banking client, have 10 million
Yep.
bucks in the bank to get access to it. Now, like over the past 10 years, we've seen platforms
Yep.
get created to pool these things, and now even services like Stashaway for our accredited investors have imagine the same type of service where people can deposit funds, and we will then disperse those funds into private opportunities, private market opportunities, and not just like angel investing, for example, but even private credit, right? Bonds
Mm-hmm.
at companies in particular as well. And these are new things for the same price, the same level of
Yep.
service, sometimes different requirements that are now, manifesting and becoming much more accessible to people at scale, right? And I think that's really interesting. And who knows, maybe lending or it's next in additional areas of that. So
Yep.
yeah, that's I think those are new and shiny though. You know what I mean? I'm interested in it because it's new and
Yep.
shiny, in particular.
No, no, I think makes sense. And to be honest, I think one thing, and we'll touch upon that as well. I think when we look at product management and advice on building, a lot of advice that gets dished out is from social commerce or social networking and
Yeah,
e-commerce, and some of that may not scale very well to fintech
yeah,
as such. And I think so. To your point, I think therefore these things that exist well in the other industries can be very shiny, and you
right,
might pursue that, and you might get to a point where you're distracted. For example, I was reading some article along back that a fintech company, a lending company apparently, added friction in their onboarding flow because they wanted their customers to understand and be mindful of what they're applying for.
Right.
And that is not what you would look when you look at an e-commerce company or a other company. And therefore, these being mindful of shiny and not shiny and useful is extremely important. And it can only happen when you spend some years building in the industry and knows what works versus what's just distraction.
Yeah, look, I mean, and this is, I don't want it to knock out there, but I probably a lot, probably 50% of the content that's created around frameworks and product management land is based off of the grades, right? The Netflix or the social platforms
Yeah.
or e-commerces. As you say, I don't want to read another case about Netflix,
Yes.
even though it's amazing. It's their business. I don't run a Netflix business, right?
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
completely different, and a lot of the sim and please, that's absolutely not to knock it because ways of operating
Of
and
course.
such, it can be, there's amazing insights, and I've read probably some of these things thousands of times. But having said that, I think one thing, a really good example would be e-commerce, uh, social platforms, these marketplaces as well, right? Peer-to-peer marketplaces. They generally make money by getting people to spend more time
Hmm.
in on the website or in the app. Why is that? Because maybe it leads to more eyeballs and click-throughs on advertising, and because they make money on ads, and therefore the more time people spent scrolling through something, the more ads they see and the more money they get, right?
Right.
Or the more time they spend on the e-commerce, the more times they might see something they want to buy and add something to a cart and then ship it off and like get it the next day or even the same day, right? Or uh, in on the other end of the spectrum, right? It's kind of funny, and I found myself in this like this paradox of how I'm, building a mobile application to ease accessibility to information and investment opportunities, right? On one hand is amazing,
Hmm.
but actually, if you look back, and studies have been done on this for the past 50 years by many different institutions of saying sometimes, for example, the best investors are the dead ones. And
Hmm.
what do I mean by that? It's somebody who like left their money in like the S&P and 30 years ago, and then unfortunately they passed away, but the money actually just stayed there and it
Right.
never changed the course. You know what I mean? And they
Yeah.
outperformed all the
Everything.
active managers, everybody else, right?
Right.
And so I feel that it's actually not in my it's not in the interest in our case of our investors based on the types of investment methodologies we employ. Right? We're not a trading house, we're a long-term investment house, I'd say. I don't want people clicking every day and
Hmm.
looking at the performance for products which, have a 5-year time horizon. It
Hmm.
actually leads to, especially in economic environments
Like
like
these.
today,
Hmm.
right? When people see a lot of red going
Right.
on,
Right.
but they set up the portfolio to buy products which are 5 years out, 10 years out for retirement purposes
Hmm.
potentially, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I can see people check in sometimes multiple times a day or every day. But historically, imagine you didn't have an app. You only had a money manager that you spoke to twice a year, once a year around Christmas.
Hmm.
You went to
Hmm.
dinner at,
Hmm. Hmm.
you wouldn't even check it for a
Right.
year,
Right.
right? You just get
Yeah.
the update. I'd be like, I need it. Okay, yeah, let's go out and I'll give you an update on your investments in 6 months from now. And you'd be like, "Ah,
Right.
okay, sounds great, right? That's why I pay you." So like, and that's actually has led to, that type of behavior actually many times leads to a lot more less anxiety, a lot
Yep.
healthier behaviors, a lot more, just trust in the process of what you set up, the hard work going through before to set up a portfolio and a regular investment strategy. You know what I mean? It's less
Yep.
anxiety inducing. So it's healthier overall. And that's where at the crossroads that I'm also, because we push content and want people to read the content,
Yep.
but I don't want them to then go check the performance, even though we can, and we make it as easy as possible for somebody to
Hmm.
check. Like we never hide information. The whole point of us is to get what you want as fast as you want it.
Yep.
But that comes with some negatives as well, right? Which
Mm,
I worry about for sometimes our investors' behalf when I see it from the product analytics, the number of logins and the sessions and where they click and how often
mm,
they
mm.
click and yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You know what I
No,
mean?
100%,
Yeah,
100%. So I think people's relation, and sometimes because, as you said, right, because lot of content is and information is coming from a social commerce and Netflix point of view,
yeah,
who are fighting with sleep.
yeah,
It becomes also very important for people like yourself, myself, to be able to have that voice and
yeah,
communicate what's right for your users. You don't want to get distracted as well.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes other business, if you got somebody running the business that comes from a e-commerce, they might set up metrics going, oh, why aren't people spending more time in the app? Well, it's actually
Hmm.
that's actually not necessarily a good thing, and you got to
Correct.
be able to
Correct.
sit at the table and
Yep. Yep.
explain to whether it's senior leads like what's important and why, or even to junior PMs when they come in, referencing a case study on how to scale, a
Yeah.
marketplace, to increase eyeballs. You help guide the way based
Yes.
off of other aspects of of the industry. So yeah, it's
100% get it. No, no, I've been on this on both sides, and I completely get this.
right.
A couple of questions before we kind of start concluding, Alex.
No worries.
So, for example, when I'm looking at new companies, within investment tech, and a lot of companies kind of reach out for investments from me.
Yeah,
One thing that seems very clear, and that you mentioned also, is that people are creating ability to invest in new asset classes. So,
yeah,
like angel investing, investing in PE firms and stuff like that.
yeah.
What are the other areas of opportunities that you see, especially in the region in Southeast Asia, that you are tracking, you are feeling excited about, and you think that it's ripe for somebody to come and disrupt it?
Okay, so this would be in terms of impact, I'd love to see it, but we're not quite there yet. And I would
Mm.
say, if certain countries in Southeast Asia like formed a bloc, yeah, say like the
Mm.
E, like imagine some of the benefits, the major cons to the EU, but some of the major benefits of the EU are being a bloc is things
Yep.
like standardization of a currency and of laws and the pass through of data and open banking has now been something which is being pushed by the regulators over there, forcing the banks and institutions to adopt, open accessibility to people's, personal transaction information in their bank, in their checking
Right.
accounts and their saving accounts, right? And it allows, and it's now allowed for some amazing product development things to happen. For
Mm.
example, you can log into one app and then say, hey, I would like to connect my bank account, right, at another institution to it and pull data from it and view it within one view, right? So, for example, if I had my investment accounts on one screen, I'd say also connect my checking accounts and investment accounts from another brokerage and from another
Mm.
brokerage, and it doesn't just ease up the things like the transfer of money, but it allows for a lot more personalization and
Right.
amazing analytics to take place in real time. And there's a lot of benefits to the end consumer
Right.
by doing this, right? For me, at the end of the day, it's always got to be about benefiting the end consumer. When you have these cartel-like structures or closed shops in regions, to me, I don't understand how that benefits the
The
end
customer. Sure.
consumer, right? The customer, because uh, right now, for example, in Stashaway, and we're not just tooting the horn here, right? But so many companies and wealth tech have amazing bits of software to help with financial planning, to help assess net worth and establish goals and what products are right for you. But because a lot of the information needed in order to establish those plans is warehoused and in one or two different institutions in particular, it means that
Mm.
the person has to go through sometimes a pretty boring and lengthy process of manually uploading that
Mm.
information so we have it so then we can turn it into something, right? Most people would rather just say, okay, yeah, connect my account to do this, that, and that,
Correct.
and then
Correct.
have the features kind of just self-populate
Mm.
themselves, right? So I would
Yep.
love, I would love to. I think that's such a huge opportunity here, where large parts of the population across countries are now
Mm.
using digital banking services, trading services, or getting loans online. They're using budgeting tools online for expense management as well, and they're living in multiple countries, dealing with multiple currencies. Like they need to have these holistic views in order to
Correct.
form better views of their financial lives, their financial livelihoods, more easily, right? It's like that's I got it. I don't know. So many people have different bank accounts across everywhere and apps for this and that and that and that, and it gets
Mm.
very confusing to just maintain. So some consolidation, I think, is something I. It needs to be driven at like the top level,
Right. So
down, but yeah.
yeah, I like very high level. There are initiatives where pay now and prompt pay are
Yes.
integrated. So those things are happening. But
Sometimes between particular
correct,
institutions, right? And
correct.
then what I see is, well, actually, is it in the best interest of some of these
Mm.
institutions to allow, to access to the disruptors who actually, I think it's in the whole point of disruptors and smaller companies coming up is to benefit the end consumer by disrupting the the traditional industry. But if the traditional industries, whatever the big banks, are the only ones to get
Right,
access to these rails, it kind of defeats the purpose, right?
right.
Because they make money off of keeping it consolidated. So I go,
Yeah.
it's
So
so yeah,
So I was in Indonesia last couple of days, and so there is a payment instrument called QRAs. It's a QR
right,
based payment method wherein I can scan and make payments.
yeah,
I think there is some fees involved when you're making that payment. One of the banks, what they did was they launched their own version of QRAs, which is free. So
hmm,
if you are in the same bank, then I can use a QR code, scan the QR code, transfer money to you, and it's free. So that we started doing it, and every other bank started to shout at this bank that why the hell do you do this?
right,
This is not good for us because it's kind of you're taking away the margins, you're taking away the transactions.
right.
So you can argue both ways that who is right, who's wrong, but yeah, these behaviors happen so often here. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. And look, again, that's why it's so important for the the role of disruptors to have voices at the
Yep.
regulatory level and the government level to help push policies which at the end of the day benefit the end consumer. To me, that's what
Mm,
it's all about, right? But having said that, there's a lot of historical and context that that goes around. These things don't change overnight, especially in
correct.
financial services. So
Yeah, no, complete. And I think, yeah, therefore, at least when I think about these things, I look at a 10-year horizon.
yeah,
I also become very
more,
mindful,
more.
more at.
I think it's gonna be more when you hit. I mean, well, especially from wealth tech, when again, it's a double-edged sword, right? When you want companies that can grow fast and
Uh,
scale, you take VC fueled, jet fueled money, and they have maybe 5-year horizons. So it's
right,
important if you're building a company to have the right partners. But then they say we want you to be the Visa.
right,
Okay, you know when Visa was founded? In 1958, right?
right. Yeah,
Literally 60, 70 years ago. They didn't just happen overnight.
correct.
We see the impact sometimes of companies that started and went public in,
Yeah,
under 5 years, and then the value of the companies once they hit public markets halves and leads to
yeah.
bad things for many different reasons. And like especially when it comes to managing money and
Mm.
facilitating money movements, like there's a reason why the biggest pillars of the world now have been around for 50 plus years.
No, I agree. Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah.
takes a while.
In,
So,
fa-
well,
in fact, there's one VC firm, I can't name them, and
yeah.
I was reading the reports, and they make an argument about that we should move away our interest from being a unicorn to being a rhinoceros. The
Oh,
argument that they're making is that
oh,
we for the
that's some thought leadership right there, Nathan.
right, right.
That's wow.
So they're
That's
saying that built for many, many years, don't look at being unicorn. And I really, I mean, it's sometimes counterintuitive and unpopular opinion, but I really like that thought of being a rhinoceros. It needs a different way of operating. It needs a different way of building, and it's quite. And I could see that you guys are in that direction. So it's very heartening
yeah.
to see that. Yeah.
Probably same with health and life
Yep.
sciences as
Yep.
well. You
Yep.
know what I mean? The same conundrum. It's like,
Right.
5-year return, no, 50-year return, amazing. 5-year, no, they're probably still developing like the DNA sequencing
Correct.
tool to
Correct.
cure cancer. Yeah,
Correct.
it's interesting.
Couple of questions, Alex, before we let you go, and thanks for spending this time.
Well, thank you.
If somebody has to know about Investment Tech 101, is there a blog post or an article that you like? Or you can ping that to me later as well. Yeah. and if there are 3 or 4 articles, so also newsletters is fine, but articles that you really enjoyed learning from, that would be helpful for our audience.
Yeah, look, I'll definitely ping you some particular ones. First and foremost, go to Investopedia because they have a highlighted number of articles for exactly that, like on the homepage. I mean,
Hmm.
how personal finance works and how to invest your money and how to manage your money.
Hmm.
Like, I love it. This is literally it's the Wikipedia of
Sure.
the
And
finance world.
hmm.
Secondly, you know, I'm sure there's probably a couple people I would say that create some great content that resonates better, especially for younger people in terms of like influencers and such,
Hmm.
which is a very dangerous world. FYI, not
Yeah.
every influencer is great, but some people I actually say, hey, this is like good content, good
Right.
material, and I'll shoot you some names as well
Yeah.
because yeah, in my old age, as you said
Right.
earlier, I get forgetful.
Alex, so thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate you for taking our time. I'm sure a lot of people would love to reach out to you, talk to you, learn from you. What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is a great way to reach out to me. Just Alex Cringle. I sometimes post articles regularly as well, and uh, I'm quite on top of the chat. So feel free to reach out to me.
Got it. Thank you so much, Alex, and really appreciate for talking to us.
No, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure
Thanks.
being here.